My name is Sarah, and I'm 28 years old. I grew up in a small town just outside of Seattle, Washington, where everyone knew everyone else, and the expectations were always clear. I always thought I could make my own path, but that's not as easy as it sounds when you don't fit into the typical mold. There was nothing wrong with me, but my appearance has always been something people commented on, sometimes subtly, other times not so much. My hair, bright red and thick, with my skin fair and marked by a noticeable birthmark that ran down my left cheek, those were the first things people saw. Most of my life, I've been forced to either accept the stares or learn to tune them out. I learned to smile through it, but deep down, it always felt like I was too different, too unpolished for the world around me. I spent years building up my career, fighting for respect in a world that told me I didn't have the right. Look for the job. I got my degree in business, worked my way up in an established company, and finally landed the role of account manager. I'd been working hard, trying to prove myself not only to my colleagues but also to myself. The birthmark, the curly red hair, it all became secondary to my performance. Or so I thought. The day I received the email invitation for the interview with one of the company's top clients was a turning point. I had worked with clients before, but this was different. This was my chance to prove that I wasn't just another unpresentable person. I wanted to show everyone that, despite my appearance, I had the skills, the intellect, and the dedication to do the job. I dressed in my best suit, my hair neatly pulled back, my makeup subtle. I walked into that meeting room with all the confidence I could muster, knowing that this was my moment. I had worked tirelessly for it, and now it was finally within reach. The meeting didn't go the way I expected. It started fine. We discussed the company's goals, and I shared the strategies I had planned. But then, something shifted. I could feel it in the air, the subtle tension, the way their eyes flicked to my face, then quickly away. I told myself I was overthinking it, but the whispers began to creep in. I could feel their discomfort, the polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. I pushed through, but with every word, the confidence I had built began to slip away. The conversation abruptly ended. I didn't even get a chance to present my closing argument before they wrapped up the meeting. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stood to leave. They were polite, but I could tell that they had already made up their minds. I didn't belong there. It was written all over their faces, in the tight smiles, the cold handshakes. I left the meeting room with my head held high, but my stomach was in knots. Later that day, as I sat at my desk, the email came. I opened it with trembling hands. Thank you for your time. Unfortunately, we have decided to go with another candidate. Who better fits our client-facing needs? I stared at the screen. My breath caught in my throat. The words were polite, businesslike, but I knew what they meant. They didn't want me because of how I looked. Not because I wasn't qualified, not because I didn't have the skills, but because my appearance didn't fit their narrow view of what was acceptable. I couldn't believe it. I had worked so hard, overcome so many obstacles, and yet, it still wasn't enough. I wasn't presentable enough for them. I sat there, stunned, unable to process what I had just read. I had always known that my appearance set me apart, but to have it used against me in such a blatant way was something I wasn't prepared for. I had been rejected not because I lacked qualifications, but because I didn't fit the mold they expected. The tears came then, unexpected and hot, as I sat at my desk and tried to hold myself together. I had worked for years, proving my worth, only to have it all erased by something as superficial as my looks. The worst part wasn't just the rejection. It was the realization that, despite all the hard work, despite the years of pushing myself, my appearance was the one thing they would never accept. It was the one thing I could never change. I didn't go home right away. I stayed in the office, sitting at my desk, staring at the empty inbox where I had hoped for something different. I tried to focus, but the words echoed in my mind, unpresentable. I wasn't even given a chance. This wasn't just about losing an opportunity. It was about everything I had fought for being reduced to something I couldn't control. The company I had worked for, the people I had worked with, they had all judged me based on my appearance. And now I was left with nothing. But as I sat there, alone in the quiet of the office, something inside me started to shift. I had been knocked down, yes, but I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let their shallow judgment be the end of me. I didn't know how, but I was going to find a way to take back control. They might have rejected me, but I wasn't going to let them decide my worth anymore. The rejection, the hurt, the anger, it all started to fuel something inside me. A spark. A drive to prove them wrong. I stood up from my desk, wiped away the tears, and opened my laptop again. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. If they thought I was unfit for the role, they had another thing coming. I wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. The days after the rejection were the hardest. I thought I could just move on, brush it off like every other setback I'd faced before. but this one was different. This time, it wasn't just about being overlooked. It was about something deeper, something that gnawed at me in ways I couldn't ignore. I had worked so hard to get to where I was. I had proven my worth to everyone except them, the ones who mattered the most. At first, I tried to stay busy. I dove into work, burying myself in projects, hoping that if I just kept moving, I could forget how much their words had hurt. But no matter how hard I tried, it was always there, that sharp sting of rejection. I couldn't escape it. It followed me home at night and lingered in the quiet moments when I wasn't distracted by something else. The word unpresentable kept echoing in my mind, louder and louder until it felt like it was all I could hear. I had never realized how much that word would destroy me. I had always been aware of my appearance, always felt different, but I had never let it stop me. Now it felt like it had one dot. I spent days questioning everything I had ever worked for, wondering if I was truly cut out for this world. I had always believed in my abilities, trusted that my hard work would eventually pay off. But now, I wasn't. So sure, what if I wasn't as good as I thought I was? What if they were right? I couldn't help but feel like I was trapped in a cycle, constantly fighting against something I could never change. Matt could see the toll it was taking on me, but he didn't know what to say. He wanted to comfort me, wanted to help, but how could he? He wasn't the one who had been told she wasn't good enough. He didn't understand the weight of it, the crushing weight of having your worth reduced to something you have no control over. He tried, but all I could feel was the distance growing between us. I could see the concern in his eyes, but there was a hesitation there too. He didn't want to make things worse, didn't know how to fix it. And honestly, neither did I. Every time I looked in the mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow broken. The birthmark that had always been a part of me now felt like a scar. I used to see it as a symbol of my uniqueness, my individuality, but now it felt like a glaring flaw, something that made people uncomfortable, something that kept me from fitting into the world I was trying to succeed in. I couldn't shake the thought that no matter how hard I worked, no matter how much I proved myself, I would always be seen as other, as different, as unworthy. The longer I let the rejection sit with me, the more I realized how deeply it was affecting me. It wasn't just about the job I didn't get anymore. It was about my entire life, the years I had spent trying to fit into a world that only accepted those who conformed to its standards. It was about the constant battle to be more, to be better, to be someone I wasn't, just to be seen as worthy. The frustration and the hurt began to spiral out of control, and I couldn't stop it. I tried to tell myself I was being dramatic, that I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew it was real. I had been rejected because of how I looked, and I couldn't change that. I couldn't change how people saw me. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep. The weight of it all pressing down on me, I felt like a failure. Not because I hadn't worked hard enough, not because I didn't deserve success, but because I was being judged by something I couldn't control. Something that had always been a part of me. I thought back to all the times I had tried to ignore the whispers, the looks, the comments. I had spent so many years pretending that it didn't bother me, but now, it felt like I was suffocating under the pressure of it all. The turning point came one night when I was sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through job listings. I had considered quitting, walking away from it all. But then, something inside me snapped. I was tired of feeling like I wasn't enough, tired of letting people's opinions define my worth. I realized that I couldn't keep doing this to myself. I couldn't keep letting my appearance be the reason I didn't get ahead. It wasn't about the job anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could do more, that I was more than just my looks. It was then that I made the decision. I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let their judgment dictate my future. I was going to take control of my own destiny. I started researching how to take over the company, how to buy out the very people who had rejected me. It felt like a crazy idea, like something out of a movie, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. I wasn't going to be a victim of their superficial standards. I was going to be the one in control. I was going to show them that I could succeed on my own terms. But as the days passed and the reality of what I was considering began to set in, the fear crept back in. What if I failed? What if I wasn't good enough? I had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but this was different. This was bigger. This was my chance to take back everything they had tried to strip away from me. And no matter how terrifying it seemed, I wasn't going to back down. The fight had only just begun. The weeks after the decision were a whirlwind. On the outside, I appeared calm, going through the motions of my daily life. But inside, it felt like everything was falling apart. I spent my days at work half-heartedly tackling projects, while my nights were consumed with thoughts of what had happened. The rejection kept replaying in my mind like a broken record. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how deeply it had affected me. The birthmark, my appearance, my entire identity, had been used against me in a way I never expected. I had worked so hard to build a career, and yet it was all dismissed in an instant because of something I couldn't change. The pain of that realization settled heavily in my chest, and I began to wonder if I was just fooling myself, if all my efforts were pointless. But then something shifted. I realized I couldn't keep playing the victim. It wasn't just about what they thought of MIT, it was about what I thought of myself. For too long, I had let others define my worth. I had spent so much of my life adjusting, apologizing for who I was, trying to make others comfortable with me. I had spent years letting my appearance dictate how I felt about myself, allowing it to hold me back. But that had to end. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open in front of me, I was searching for new jobs again. I had sent out a dozen applications in the past 2 weeks, hoping for something to stick. I was waiting for someone to give me the chance I deserved. But as I scrolled through the endless listings, a new thought began to take root. I had been looking for someone to give me a job, to give me an opportunity. But why couldn't I create my own? Why couldn't I take the power back? I stared at the screen, the realization hitting me like a bolt of lightning. Why not take control? Why not stop waiting for someone else to give me a chance and create my own? The idea seemed audacious at first, even laughable, but as I thought more about it, the more it made sense. I wasn't going to let my looks be the reason I couldn't succeed. I wasn't going to let their superficial judgments stop me from achieving my goals. I was better than that. I had worked too hard to let something as trivial as my appearance define me. I could do this. I didn't know the first thing about buying a company, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. The more I thought about it, the more the idea of taking control, of making them see me for what I truly was, became irresistible. I had been dismissed for being unfit, but I would show them just how unfit I really was. I would own the company. I would make them regret every single word they'd said about me. I spent the next few days diving deep into research, learning everything I could about how businesses were bought and sold. I wasn't exactly sure what steps to take, but I had a feeling. I knew that the first step was to stop listening to the voices of doubt in my head. I had spent too long letting others dictate what I could do, letting their judgments define my limits. It was time for me to set my own path. As I continued to dig through the information, I felt something within me shift. A fire, a determination, that had been buried deep inside me for so long started to burn brightly. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for someone to offer me a job. I was going to take the power back. I was going to build my own future. One where my worth wasn't defined by my appearance, where my success would come from, my ability, my intellect, my resilience. The world didn't get to decide what I could achieve. I did. I started drafting plans. I reached out to lawyers and financial advisors, asking for their help in navigating the process. Every step I took felt like I was moving closer to something bigger than I had ever imagined. The fear was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't a paralyzing fear that held me back. It was the kind of fear that drove me forward, that pushed me to prove everyone wrong. I wasn't just going to prove to them that I was capable. I was going to prove it to myself. By the end of the week, I had taken the first steps to make my plan a reality. I had spoken to people who could help me make it happen, and though it seemed like a long shot, I was more determined than ever. I had nothing to lose. If they thought I wasn't fit for the job, I would show them just how wrong they were. I would rise above their expectations and claim the success I knew I deserved. That's when I realized that this wasn't just about buying a company, it was about reclaiming my own life. It was about telling the world, and more importantly myself, that I was more than the sum of my appearance. I was capable, I was strong, and I would prove it not just to them but to everyone who had ever looked at me and thought I wasn't good enough. And so, with each step I took, I could feel the weight of the past lifting off of me. The shame, the rejection, the doubts, all of it began to fade as I focused on the path ahead. The path where I would finally take control of my future, and where no one would ever tell me I wasn't enough again. The days after I made the decision to buy the company felt like a blur. I had taken the first steps, but as the reality of what I was trying to do started to sink in, the fear began to settle in too. It wasn't just about buying the company, it was about proving myself, about showing them that I was worthy, that I was capable. The weight of that expectation started to feel heavier than I had anticipated. I had pushed past the doubts of others, but now I had to face my own. I remember sitting at my desk one night, staring at the papers in front of me. The plan was set, the legal steps outlined, but there was a voice in my head that kept telling me this was a mistake. What if I failed? What if I couldn't do it? There were moments when the fear was so overwhelming that I could barely breathe, and I found myself second-guessing every move I had made. The numbers, the contracts, the people, I had to convince it was all so much bigger than I had ever imagined. There were times when I felt like I was drowning in it, unable to see beyond the weight of the challenge ahead. I had always believed in myself. I had always thought I could push through anything, but this was different. This wasn't just a job. This was my future, my reputation, and my chance to prove that I could succeed despite the judgment I had faced for so long. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined, and with each passing day, I felt more uncertain about my ability to pull this off. The phone calls, the meetings, the endless negotiations, they were taking a toll on me. I had to convince people to believe in me, to trust me with their money, their business, and every time I walked into a meeting, I felt the weight of the rejection I had faced so many times before. I could feel their eyes on me, sizing me up, wondering if I was truly fit to lead. I had spent my entire life battling against those looks, those judgments, but now they seemed to be coming from all directions. It was as if the world had decided I didn't belong, and no matter how hard I fought, it was never enough. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, when the anxiety gnawed at me, when I wondered if I had made the right choice. I had no backup plan, no safety net. If I failed, it wouldn't just be a setback. It would be the end of everything I had worked for. I couldn't help but think of all the people who had doubted me, who had told me that I wasn't fit, that I wasn't good enough. I had thought that buying the company would be my answer, that it would prove everyone wrong, but now, the weight of that decision was starting to crush me. I couldn't shake the fear of failure. I couldn't stop thinking about how everyone would see me if I didn't succeed. The very people who had written me off would get to say, "We told you so." The rejection I had fought so hard to overcome would haunt me again, and this time, it wouldn't just be about my appearance. It would be about my ability to lead, to make decisions, to build something of value. I wasn't just fighting for my career anymore, I was fighting for my own sense of worth. I spent hours on the phone with my lawyer, going over the details, making sure everything was in place. I was doing everything I could to make this work, but the self-doubt lingered. I had never felt so uncertain, so out of my depth. The pressure was suffocating, and the weight of it felt like it was dragging me down. I had started this journey with such clarity, with such confidence, but now, all I could feel was fear and uncertainty. One night, after another long day of meetings and calls, I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, staring into space. I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending like everything was fine. The exhaustion was starting to show, my shoulders ached from the tension, and my mind felt like it was constantly racing. I was living in a constant state of worry, always thinking ahead, always anticipating the next problem. And yet, despite all the preparation, all the work I had put in, it felt like I was walking on a tightrope, one wrong move away from falling. The fear that had been building inside me was now a palpable weight on my chest. I wasn't sure I could keep carrying it. I wasn't sure I was strong enough to face the consequences if I failed. The fear of rejection was a constant companion, whispering in my ear, reminding me of all the times I had been told I wasn't good enough. It had been my greatest fear for so long, and now, it was looming over me again. I had fought so hard to get to this point, but the closer I got to making the decision, the more I felt like I was about to lose everything. But then, in the silence of that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that I couldn't keep going down this path of fear and doubt. I had come this far, and I wasn't going to let the fear of failure stop me now. I had already shown the world that I was capable, that I had the drive and the determination to succeed. I wasn't going to let anyone, not even myself, tell me that I couldn't do this. I had to push through, no matter how scared I was. No matter how heavy the weight of doubt felt, I had to keep going. The crisis wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about me, my belief in myself, my ability to stand up to everything that had tried to hold me down. The fear would always be there, but I had to face it head on. I couldn't let it control me any longer. It was time to take the next step, no matter how terrifying it seemed. I had to move forward. I had to show everyone, including myself, that I was worth it. The decision had been made. The moment I took that first step, everything changed. I had spent days, weeks even, grappling with doubt and fear, questioning whether I was making the right choice, if I could really go through with it. But the moment I signed the papers, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just moving forward. I was stepping into a new version of myself. I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. Not because everything was going to be easy, but because I had finally taken control. The first few days after the decision were a blur of paperwork, meetings and strategy sessions with my team. I'd gone from being the outsider, the one rejected, to the one who had all the power. It felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's story. The same people who had dismissed me for being unfit were now the ones I was negotiating with, the ones who would have to answer to me. It was a strange feeling, one I couldn't quite grasp at first. I had imagined it, fantasized about it even, but when it actually happened, it was more overwhelming than I could have ever prepared for. As the days passed, I began to settle into the role of owner. It wasn't easy. There were people I had to convince, processes I had to overhaul, and a company that had been struggling long before I bought it. But there was a fire inside me now, something that hadn't been there before. I wasn't just doing this to prove them wrong anymore. I wasn't just fighting for my own success. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. For everyone who had been dismissed, rejected, pushed aside because they didn't fit into someone's idea of what they should be. The first real test came when we had to present the company's new vision to the board. I had spent hours preparing, refining the plan, making sure it was perfect. But the moment I walked into that boardroom, I could feel the tension in the air. The same people who had once dismissed me were sitting around that table looking at me with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. They didn't believe in me, not yet. They didn't see the changes I had made, the new direction I was leading the company in. All they saw was the girl they had rejected, the one they had called unpresentable. But I wasn't that person. Anymore, I wasn't the person they thought they knew. As I stood there laying out the plan, I could feel the shift in the room. I could see the looks on their faces as they started to pay attention. I wasn't just speaking about numbers and strategies. I was speaking from a place of experience, of knowing what it was like to be underestimated, to be pushed aside, and to fight for what you deserve. I was speaking from a place of truth. As the meeting went on, I could see their attitudes starting to change. The questions they asked were no longer about my appearance or my qualifications. They were about the future, about the potential of the company. They were finally listening to me, and that was when I realized I had already won. I had already proved that I was capable, that I was more than the girl they had rejected. I didn't need their validation anymore, but that didn't mean I was done. This was just the beginning. I had the power now, but with that power came responsibility. I couldn't let it go to my head. I couldn't forget the journey that had brought me here. The transformation wasn't just about taking over the company. It was about becoming the person I had always known I could be, the person I had hidden from for so long. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone's judgment dictate my worth. I was going to prove myself, not just to them, but to everyone who had ever doubted me. I spent the next few weeks diving deeper into the company's operations. I listened to my team, made changes where necessary, and began to implement a vision that reflected who I was and what I believed in. It wasn't just about the bottom line. It was about creating a company culture that valued people, that didn't judge based on appearance, but on talent, on drive, and on what they could bring to the table. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right path. I knew it was what I had to do. One night, as I sat in my office staring out at the city skyline, I realized how far I had come. I thought back to the rejection, to the pain I had felt when they told me I wasn't fit for the role. I thought about the days I had spent questioning my worth, wondering if I was ever going to get a fair shot. But now, I was sitting in that office, a place I had once dreamed of, knowing that I had earned it. I had fought for it, and I had won. I wasn't just the owner of a company. I was the owner of my life. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that interview room months ago. I had changed. I had found my strength, my voice, and my purpose, and I wasn't going to stop. This was just the beginning of what I was capable of. The days and weeks that followed felt like a constant whirlwind, but this time, I was in control. Every decision I made was a testament to how far I had come, how much I had grown. The early mornings, the late nights, none of it felt like a burden anymore. It felt like the price I had to pay for the chance to prove myself, to show the world that I was more than they had ever thought I could be. The company was changing, and so was I. The boardroom became my stage. At first it had been filled with skepticism, with the cold stares and whispered doubts. But as the weeks passed, as I began to push forward with my vision, I could feel that shift. The same people who had once doubted me were now listening. They were paying attention to what I had to say, to the ideas I was bringing to the table. I wasn't just a face to be ignored anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. One of the most defining moments came during the annual company presentation. It was the moment when I was going to introduce my vision for the company's future, the changes I had made and where I saw us going. The same board members who had once dismissed me were sitting in front of me now, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of their judgment. I didn't feel like the girl who had been rejected, the one who was told she wasn't good enough. Instead, I felt powerful. I felt like I belonged. As I stood there presenting my plan, I could see their faces shift. Their expressions, once full of doubt, were now filled with intrigue. They were seeing the potential in what I was saying, in what I was doing. I could feel it in the room. The atmosphere had changed. They weren't just hearing me. They were understanding me. They were seeing me as more than just my appearance. They were seeing me for my skills, my ideas, my vision. They were seeing me for who I had always known I was, but never had the chance to show. When I finished, there was silence. For a moment, it felt like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for someone to speak. I didn't know what would happen next, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had done everything I could. I had laid everything out for them, shown them what I was capable of, and it was enough. Slowly, one by one, the board members started to speak. They praised the work I had done, the direction I was taking the company in, and I could feel it, the recognition, the respect I had been fighting for. It was finally mine. When the meeting ended, I walked out of that room with my head held high. The battle had been long, and there had been moments when I wasn't sure if I could win. But now, as I stood in the hallway, the weight of the victory settled in. I had proven them wrong. I had taken control of my life, my future. The girl who had once been told she wasn't good enough was now leading a company that was thriving under her direction. In the following weeks, the change became even more apparent. The company was doing better than it had in years. I had created a culture where people felt valued, where they weren't judged by how they looked or by the image they projected. They were judged by what they brought to the table. I had created a place where people could thrive, no matter who they were, no matter how they looked. And that, more than anything else, was the victory. As I sat in my office, looking out at the city skyline, I realized just how far I had come. I thought back to the rejection, to the hurt and the pain that had pushed me to this point. I thought about the people who had told me I wasn't fit for the role, the ones who had judged me for something I couldn't control, and I smiled, not out of bitterness, but out of pride. I had shown them that it wasn't about appearance. It was about what was inside, about the fire that burned within, about the determination to prove that I was more than what they had believed I had done. I had built something of my own, and I had done it on my terms. The battle wasn't just for the company, it was for me. It was for my self-worth, my belief in myself. I had spent too many years letting others define me, but now I was the one defining my future. I wasn't just the owner of a company. I was the owner of my own success, my own destiny, and nothing would take that from me. As I looked at the papers on my desk, the contracts, the plans for the next phase of the company, I felt a sense of accomplishment that I had never known before. This was my victory, and no one could take it away from me. The girl who had once been dismissed, who had once been told she wasn't enough, had turned the tables and created something that was hers. The journey had been long and hard, but now, it was clear, I was exactly where I was meant to be, and I wasn't going anywhere.